Chapter 34. From the fire escape of a building across the street from the Bluebell, I scouted. The orc stomped up on schedule to collect from the cafe adorned in the same sanitation worker's uniform as last time. I analyzed him from my corner of the fire escape landing. Unknown orc. Level 10. I climbed down and lurked in the alley until he emerged from the cafe with his cash. He portrayed undeniable confidence in the way he lumbered down the street to the next shop, without so much as a glance over his shoulder. Moments later, he emerged, stuffing his take into the big gym bag he slogged. He did venture a glance around before he started off for the next pickup, so I melted into the shadows of a row of steeds tethered outside a tavern. I worried they might kick up a fuss at my presence, but other than shifting from foot to foot, they didn't seem to care. Your concealment skill has reached rank 7. He crossed to my side of the street to enter a tavern. I stood between two horses, hunched like I was preparing to ride off if he caught sight of me. But it must have been a night like any other to him. Not many in the halfling district would boast the cojones to lurk with the intent to grab his loot. The moment he slipped inside, I sought the nearest fire escape. I scrambled up to a flat roof, then stopped short, surprised by a halfling couple lounging on a blanket and drinking a bottle of wine while gazing at the stars. I apologized for the interruption as I dashed across to the far side of the roof. The orc appeared right when I reached the ledge. Perfect. Backing up, I sprinted, shoved off the elevated ledge, then kicked my legs like a long jumper's as my body cut the air despite the gap between buildings being narrow. No point taking chances, and I wasn't about to lose my progress. If I believed my system clock, I tracked the orc for over an hour through the halfling district to the edge of human territory. I imagined the weight of that bag growing heavier with each stop. The covert observations led to pings from my messaging system, but I didn't tear my gaze from him until he disappeared through the back door of another tavern. I was pleasantly surprised when I reviewed what I'd missed. Your concealment skill has reached rank 8. Your concealment skill has reached rank 9. Your movement speed has increased to rank 13. Your stamina has increased to rank 13. Jesus. Maybe I ought to follow random people and rank up my skills. When he emerged through the same back door, the bag was gone. If he left the bag there, I needed to see where it went next. I studied the building, committing it to memory in case I lost track of the money's movements, then remembered I could just mark the fucker on my map. Someone needed to get into the groove. I clambered down the drainage pipe of a fieldstone building meant to look like a castle. The area was lousy with them. Castles for all. The 8-Ball Tavern was hopping, its line spilling outside then reaching down to the end of the block. The crowd, any fire marshal's nightmare, milled in the narrow entry beyond the muscle as they tried to access the main area. I watched from a seat on the steps of the castle, adopting the posture of someone with time on his hands debating what kind of trouble he wanted to get into. But my clothes were clean and presentable. I even wore a blazer lent to me by Tansy's dad just to dress myself up a little. After scoping out the place, I queued up. The line crawled for 20 minutes before I strolled up to the bouncer, dipping my head in a respectful nod. He thrust out a hand to block my way, repeating a gesture I'd seen him use with several others. Almost never were they sent away, so I had that going for me. "What's up, little man?" Not mean, not welcoming. Just a douchebag picking people out of the crowd to show he still ran the show. I grinned. "Just out hunting for some company." He chuckled as he scanned me from head to toe. "You think you're going to find some pussy here?" "Sure, why not? We don't allow professionals to work the place." Wasn't looking for a pro, just some company. Although I doubted he'd care, I shoved my hands in my pockets and shrugged in that aw, shucks way some found endearing. Then I shot him a hopeful look. "Give a guy a chance, huh?" He gave a derisive shake of his head, then chuckled, a low rumbling sound, and gestured me through. "These girls will eat you alive." Your persuasion attribute has increased to rank 9. The scents of smoke, spilled booze, and armpits intermingled to create quite the ambiance. A band played on a small stage on the far side of the room, too loud and too awful, but the noise seemed to be magically amplified. I couldn't spot any modern equipment. They featured a bass larger than the player, something I thought might be a lute, a hand drum painted with flowers, and a male singer whose voice I suspected was mercifully lost in the racket. A seat emptied at the end of the bar, and I slid into it. From there I could pretend to watch the band, but had a great line of sight down the hallway to the bathrooms and kitchen area, not to mention the back door the orc used when he exited without the money bag. I ordered a watered-down ale and nursed it. Idle thoughts of suicide were just creeping in when the band took a break. The way they grated on my nerves because they couldn't even tune their instruments properly left me thinking I couldn't have lasted another minute. The packed-in crowd on the dance floor parted to make way for a guy in a slick suit who strutted through like he owned the place. A hawkish beak of a nose protruded from a face only a mother could look at, and his platinum hair was buzzed short. His mouth sagged in a prissy pout beneath the weasel's squint he sported, like someone who should have been wearing glasses. A waitress greeted him with her cleavage, and he paused to slide his arm around her. They jabbered, but I wasn't close enough to hear it first. Then, in a stroke of luck rivaling the emptying of the bar stool in the crowd, they sidled up to the bar. "Was he on time?" She nodded. "Yes, Mr. Barnabas. For once." "Yeah, for once. Don't know why Bowminster doesn't replace him. Seems to work on his own schedule. Am I right? You know those thugs. They aren't hired for their punctuality." She set down her empty tray, then slipped her arm inside the crook of his elbow to escort him to the back hallway. I feigned disinterest when they left the bar. She stopped at the door, patted his back, then slid off into the crowd. Barnabas disappeared into the back. A thick human with stringy hair pushed through swinging doors from the kitchen with a familiar gym bag thrown over one shoulder. He pushed open the back door, propped it open, then disappeared into the alley. When he slipped back into the club a moment later, he re-entered the kitchen to gather another bag. I gave up my seat and eased into the crowd in search of a better angle. Near the hallway, I leaned on the wall and watched as he dropped bags into the back of a wagon between a load of barrels I suspected were arranged to block the view of people on the streets. Given the way he handled the bags, the barrels were likely empty. Mr. Barnabas returned my way. He strolled through the crowd, which parted to give him a wide berth, then out the front door. I mumbled something about going for a piss to no one in particular, then hurried down the hallway. I leaned out far enough to glance both ways. Convinced it was clear, I swung onto the back of the wagon. Seconds later, the draft horse took off with such a jolt the barrels threatened to topple. They wobbled back to stillness, and the strain on the rope securing them eased. Yeah, empty. The driver hadn't turned to examine his load, nor had he sensed anything was amiss. Business as usual. He whistled a tune, guiding the horses with casual focus. I felt momentarily secure about sneaking into the wagon, but when we turned onto the street, I saw Mr. Barnabas getting into a carriage to follow behind, and I had to wriggle between the barrels to hide. I chastised myself for not predicting the man would follow the money. I held my breath and snuck a look at the carriage from between the barrels. Lanterns swung behind the driver, a creepy little goblin in livery directing a white horse with loads of brass on its harness. No one leaned out the side to shout at the wagon to stop because there was a stowaway, so my good fortune continued. The barrels made hollow thunks when we passed over bumps. Each was stenciled with something resembling a maze. The brand marking was lost on me. The caravan of two trotted south on the main road, then over the north bridge to the far side of the river stretching over the ravine in the center of River City. We passed the racetrack, I could hear the horses again, and traversed the Gnome District. As we neared its far border, I got a new message. You have discovered the Goblin District. Plus 50 XP Bowminster was a goblin, so, if my luck remained, I might lay eyes on the creep. Fewer streetlights lit the roadway, casting it in uncertain shadows. Low creatures scuttled across the road to disappear into the darkness, though I couldn't swear it wasn't my imagination, since I couldn't hear the sounds of their skittering over clopping hooves and rocking barrels. Buildings lining the road were decrepit and minuscule, the whole area run down and unwholesome. We turned onto what seemed to be a private driveway, just long enough to be pretentious. The driver called out to the horse, and we pulled up to an impressive iron gate lit by torches. A wooden sign overhead proclaimed it to be Labyrinth Wines. A pair of orc guards marched back to the carriage to speak with Barnabas, so I ducked low to conceal myself from all angles. Shit. What had started as recon was turning into something more. I was at least a mile from the bridge leading back into the city proper as I knew it, and hadn't planned for my exodus from hiding. I peeked again. The driver of the carriage I occupied moseyed back to join the threesome chattering behind. As I crept to the side of the wagon, I spotted a gap between two barrels, so I rolled over, then eased myself down into the shadows of some rose bushes, careful not to catch Mr. Bluebell's jacket on the thorns. Once the wagon and carriage had passed into the estate and the guards returned to their hut, I dipped low, then scurried along the fence until I was clear of the driveway. The scene was impossible. High walls blocked my view on all sides. Guards manned the gates in the front and rear. So much for recon. I'd need to regroup and figure out a way in, but judging from the security presence and the layout of the joint, at least I knew where the place was. And Lyle Bowminster's days were numbered. I hoped. After hustling back to the road and making certain no one spotted me, I turned north toward the bridge that would take me back to Tansy's. That's when an alert filled my screen. Mafioso online web messaging system. You have a new external message from Jack Carruthers. Subject, in the shit. Message, Skyhawk, son of a bitch. Chapter 35. The pod's hydraulics hissed when I returned to my body in the outside world. The colored lights strung along the corners of the walls flooded in. I blinked, then raised my arm to shade my face. The nerves in my shoulder screamed at my brain, then I winced and dropped back in the seat. Expletives erupted forth. When the pain receded and the circulation returned to my legs, I lurched to the egress door, then pressed my ear to it. All quiet on the home front. The mood lighting on the pod flashed red twice, then a soft, feminine voice filled the room. Incoming call request. I hustled back to the pod, then slipped inside. A flashing green icon in the center of its HUD display beckoned. Fear that it would vanish if I didn't thrust my finger at it hard and fast stung me. When I did, the screen lighting pulsed. Then an image framed in solid black appeared. The face on the other end was one I'd seen enough times it could never be erased from my mind. Jack. But it wasn't in any conditions I'd seen it before. One eye and his nose swelled. His lip had been busted and already bulged with a purple scab. Jack leaned toward the camera on his end to give me a close-up of the damage. Dude, I'm pinned in. The muscles in my jaw went slack. Pinned in where? By whom? The fucking feds. After I busted in to break you out of that basement in-game, I spied black Suburbans on the street. They weren't even trying to hide. I slipped back into the cyber cafe, then out the back. What kind of idiot law enforcement doesn't watch the back door? Count yourself lucky. But why run? What do they have on you? Divots in his forehead formed an 11 as his face contorted. You're kidding, right? We chased feds out of the game. FBI's looking to get you in front of a judge. How about obstruction? He had me there. Even if it wouldn't hold up, they could charge and hold him until they got bored. Or until he gave up the golden goose that was me. My subconscious chose that moment to bring the worst image of Brenner's dead body I could imagine to the forefront of my mind. Although I hadn't been there and had little to go on, my brain had seen enough carnage to draw some pretty ugly pictures. The busted face eyeing me in the display made it worse. I didn't want Jack suffering the same fate. I rolled his situation around in my mind, but ultimately decided I needed more information. Where the hell are you? Can you say? He nodded. I'm calling from a friend's rig, but you know better than anyone the kind of information the FBI can dig up in a hurry. Yeah, known associates. Jack tapped his swollen nose twice. Yep. The absence of a flinch when he touched the cut on the bridge of his nose reminded me of Tansy Bluebell. That NPCs were so genuine I could compare theirs to real-life human tendencies was insane enough, but crazy was commonplace. Can you get back to the... I stopped my words short, considering. To me? Hey, I don't even know where you are. The response further emphasized that Jack didn't know who might be listening, and his earlier sentiments about FBI resources to track him down and get warrants gave me pause. Right, sorry. I figured the Nerd King would have told you. Nope, but suffice it to say the shit is thick. I can't even get out of this town for all the heat, from both sides. I leaned forward. You didn't go back to where we were, right? He shook his head. They took me to a field office to question me. Rossi had men waiting when I left. They're the ones who redesigned my face. He pointed toward his abrasions and bruises as if I couldn't see them. I got out of there after Brenner. He frowned. This time the scab on his lip must have sucked because he flinched and raised a finger to it. Are you at least somewhere Rossi won't find you? It might be safer to just turn yourself into the feds. His lip curled. You're kidding, right? Fuck those guys. Just because they didn't beat me like the syndicate doesn't mean they offer better options. Protection comes at a cost on both sides, which you know better than anyone. Besides, if I go in, I'll find myself in a basement somewhere for God knows how long. If I need more reasons to avoid FBI custody, something happened with the Rossis you don't know about. You can come to your own conclusion how that makes law enforcement a particular problem, and the mob a bigger problem than it was before. You mean after Brenner? He nodded but didn't reply. I gathered he'd whacked one of the muscles who put the screws to him. Shit. While he could always make a self-defense plea and eventually get off, the Rossis wouldn't forget his crime. I shook my head. Enough was enough. Listen up, Jack. I want you to get as far away from all of them as you can. I raised a finger when he parted his lips as if he'd speak. No. Listen. You've done more than any friend could ask. And if you avenged Brenner, intentionally or not, you need to fly until the heat dies down. Take your own advice. Make tracks for the sunset. I never said that. You've implied it more than once, and you were right. Don't be hard-headed like me and ignore good advice. I added a lie for good measure. I'm making real progress. I'm going to get the info I need, then the family will back off. You think it's going to be that easy? No way, you're off your rocker. Well, I don't see any other choices. Without Brenner's tech know-how, a lot of options are off the table. Trust me, Jack. It's time to fly. Once you're safe, you know how to find me. Until then, ride off. Look. I disconnected the call. There was no way I'd talk him out of anything, and I knew it. If he planned to find his way back to the cabin, he would. But I suspected he wouldn't risk drawing a tail, and according to the weather display in one corner of the screen where his image had been a moment earlier, it was snowing buckets outside. The game had changed, and I needed to remember the mission. Level up, gain allies, find out who the Rossis interacted with in-world to do their dirty deeds, collect the data, then send a message. When I thought about Jack and all he'd done to save my life, I realized there would need to be 2 messages, and so be it. I snarfed MREs, sanitized and redressed my wound, then logged back in.